All right. Today's stream, truthfully, I've been pretty focused over the past couple of weeks on reports for obvious reasons. But I haven't really polled the community very much on what they'd like to talk about today. So I went ahead and decided to put a few things together on my own. So this stream is going to focus a bit on some of the different CAD tools. We're not going to go too deeply into that, but when I was working for an AWI shop, I had to produce a lot of cross sections, and I had probably to produce more than most shops would because of the demands we imposed on ourselves at that facility more than what the architects required of us. But the result was that I really needed to do basically for every room section details for each type of assembly that existed in the room because of the way they wanted things done. And all of that aside, we don't need to talk about why they wanted it done that way, but the fact remains that was a huge burden for me to do. And so I worked for quite a while to develop different ways to speed up the process, and a lot of that has to do with layers and really tying some of the details about the assemblies to your CAD information. And I'm unless you're really working for a modular organization that just has standard sizes and standard everything, you kind of need to be able to um, take a typical assembly and customize it. I don't usually have more than one or two default layouts for my assemblies because I find that it's typically just as fast to reconfigure one as it is to search through a long list of different types of cabinets with different quantities of faces and select from that. And that's my personal philosophy, obviously. You may feel differently, but ultimately, if you're customizing each assembly, you have to put a lot of work into your CAD details. And every job is different. Sometimes you might have a rubber base going on your toe, where other situations you might need to finish the toe yourself. Um, and so really, these different conditions can take a lot of time. And what I found was that taking the time up front to really build yourself a good starting point, a good library of symbols, and a lot of room notes, frankly, to control the ways that these different details work will be worth your time. And I don't currently work for an AWI shop, and so a lot of these things I'm going to talk about, I don't actually have built into my system. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to walk through a little bit of some of what I built this morning and probably draw a couple of other things here just to help demonstrate the value in taking the time to really build up your assembly catalog before you start working through drawings if you have the time. And obviously, if you're already a shop that's in production and you're doing this, find time, hire somebody specifically to do this if you're in charge of hiring, or if it's just you doing the job, take an extra, 10 or 15 minutes a day for a couple of weeks and work your way towards this. It will pay off. It won't actually take very long before you'll notice that your drawings are getting completed much more quickly and with a much greater consistency. And that's really, when you're producing AWI quality shop drawings, it's really important to remain very, very consistent across everything that you do. So this is just a kind of a base cabinet that I've got, and I drew some very, very simple details to start with. And one of the things that I was talking about really is, what if you have different different types of toe bases. And so I just drew a typical little, I don't know, toe cake detail here. And this would be typically, if I were doing this, again, if I were building my library to do this, I would probably have some CAD notes here. And, I'd have something like finished toe base, and then I would tie that note, I would put another little text note down here, and this one would be something like, depending on how I've got my catalog set up, it would just be one of these different material schedules for the room. So let's just say base material schedule, right? So KML white, that's just the name of my material schedule. And so if you had, a couple of different options, if you had like a rubber base and a finished base, such as this, where we're going to have our finished toe base that's going to match the faces of our drawers, the way that you can quickly get this done on a per job basis without having to spend too much time really customizing each of these things is to take this information and associate it with a layer. So this would go with my standard toe layer. And then to just demonstrate, let's just say that if I had a rubber toe base, I don't want to call the finish out because it's a rubber toe base and I don't care what a finish it is. It's by somebody else. I build cabinets. I don't do rubber bases. So how do you quickly make this happen? So you may have seen while I was in here that I do have a couple of different layer schedules. And one of them is standard toe and one is rubber base. So right now I have my standard toe layer on. And before I switch over to the rubber base layer, there's one other thing I'd like to show. I have this whole portion of my toe cake grouped. And these dimensions here are actually placed by me, where the 24 is a system default. And so what I would do if I was building a section detail, if I've got an assembly that's less than 24, I need to be able to quickly move all of this stuff all at once. And let's just say that I know I like to have my notes about my toe base right about here. And maybe I even, want to have a leader going to it or something. I have this entire portion grouped already as the standard toe. I feel as though this should also be grouped so that this can all be moved at the same time. And something I'd like to show, because this can be confusing when you start building really complex section details for cabinets, is when I grouped these different CAD notes, because the layer I'm on is default, it actually converts the group to the default layer. However, if you then ungroup, even if you're on the default layer, these go back to the layer that they belonged to. That can be frustrating and confusing. So just remember, it's always best practice to set your individual CAD entities layer first, and then once you group them, set the layer again. So at this point, I would even go so far as to possibly group all of this stuff together as my standard toe layer. And so now if I were to save this assembly to my catalog, which I'm not going to do, but I will make a copy of it. And let's say that, I'm going along with my job and there's a section where the assembly needs to be 21 instead of 24. Once we change this, all of our CAD's kind of messed up, you could say. But because of the way that I've built this, and I don't really remember what was my start and my end point here, but if you build your layers and you know what your start and end point is, which you should because you would be manipulating this somewhat regularly, you can pick which point to move, and you can just change the number. So I picked the wrong one, which is okay. But you change this dimension because our toe kick is going to be pretty typical, right? And then because I've grouped everything here, it's very simple to just pick it up and snap it back. And now, even though I've got a different depth cabinet here, I can still pull my standard assembly from the catalog and achieve my section details fairly quickly. So, what about the rubber base, right? Now I'm going to close this job that was for, I don't know, a university or something, and I'm going to go work on a hospital job, and they've got rubber base everywhere or something like that. I don't want to have a separate catalog with separate details for all of these things. So if you have it set up with the different options that you tend to run into most with the style of bids that you at your organization produce, it becomes very easy to just switch your details. And you'll notice, right, obviously this portion of my section details didn't move with my standard toe base. However, again, because I've got this sort of grouped, and I'll move it out in a way to show you, none of these details are grouped here. These are just all individual CAD lines because they're always going to stay back here at my reference point for my assembly. The back of the cabinet's never really going to move. We're only going to reduce in depth from this end view from the front here. So all of this is grouped while none of this is, and it makes it very easy to make different adjustments. So again, what this is doing is it's giving you the flexibility to manipulate different layers on a typical cabinet to achieve different section details very quickly. So another thing that I know you need to do a lot if you are doing AWI drawings is blocking. And if you want to show your blocking on your elevations, that's fine. I think that that's really fast, and I think it's a great way to go about it. But if your organization demands that you call out your blocking in section, and you've got your notes about blocking by others or whatever, for a base cabinet, this is really easy to do. I don't, if memory serves, I don't even need to pull my own dimension here unless I'm trying to go to the center of my blocking, because there's no way I can use cabinet vision to get this particular dimension. I could go from the bottom of my cabinet automatically to the top of my cabinet, and then I could have a little, CAD note over here for the toe kick if I wanted, but that's not very useful to me either. So this is where you can start to do some math with your notes and associate them with your assemblies parameters. So what I mean by that is, let's just say that you always draw your blocking at 6 inches tall. You can, I'll just build it on the cabinet. You can build with equations some pretty flexible tools to drive numbers in CAD, even though we can't really control CAD with UCS necessarily. And what I mean is you can't like dim a dimension with the UCS, but we can control parameters and variables, and with those we can control CAD notes on our assemblies. So I've made this parameter here called blocking height, and if you don't really understand this view, if 1 then 0, 1 just means true or yes or always. It almost just kind of gets rid of the if then portion of it and turns this into nothing more than a specific equation for whatever parameter it is that we are building. So what would this equation be? Basically, we're going to look for the cabinet's height plus the cabinet's toe kick height, which I have a UCS that queries for cabinet Y at the room level and drives that value to cap.yy. Because if you're unfamiliar with this, while you're in the assembly editor, your cabinet's X, Y, and Z values are not really what they are in the room. And I'm not going to go into that a whole lot in this video, but basically I need to reference cap.yy here, and I'll show you, right? The cabinet height plus the 4-inch toe kick that I know I have is going to be 34.5. But if I just reference cap.y while I'm in the assembly editor, my number's all screwed up. Anyway, so cabinet height plus the cabinet's elevation minus 3 inches, because I know I always do, 6-inch blocking. Or you could even drive this from another variable in case for some reason you require different height blocking. So anyway, so now this is 31.5, which is exactly the dimension I've drawn here. And so once I've added this parameter, I'm fairly certain this, yes. So now I have a variable here that can kind of be saved. And if I change my cabinet's height, my dimensions number does not change, but my CAD node does. And now it's, it's the correct height for what all of this would be if I had drawn this up, where the assembly is now. But it's all very time consuming. It's tedious to do all of this. And after doing it enough, you're really going to want to find a better way to do it. And that's really where this note comes into play. So one of the struggles that I ran into was the fact that, typically we see dimensions where it's a number with a long line, going to the endpoints. And I don't know who decided necessarily that that's absolutely required, but I know for a fact that I see this from time to time, and I'm okay with it, and everyone I've spoken to is. And I see this from time to time, just because maybe this area of the drawing is busy, or whatever it is, Um, Maybe you've got bigger spaces between your number and your lines. It's preference. So what I'm getting at is instead of using a dimension line here that would have to constantly be moved, if you really want to dedicate the time to this and just eliminate the need to ever really produce dimensions on your section details, you can do some pretty cool stuff. So what I had done while I was working for that shop was I dimmed a bunch of lines with a UCS. And so I kind of tied a UCS in with my section details. And what that ended up being was a black line, so like dim black as a new part. And I would just set the thickness of the line would be 0.001, the width of the line would be 0.001, and the length of the line would be whatever my typical shop drawings dimension from here to here would be. So if I typically had a 5-inch line or a 6-inch marker right here for my dimension, you can use a UCS to dim a black object to fall right in this exact location. And I'll show you an example of how I've done something like that. A lot of times we sell closets out of materials that don't come in a 10-foot length. And so to deal with that, because our sales team doesn't always really remember, and that can be very problematic if your customer's not expecting it, that you're going to have to like biscuit panels together or whatever. It's not a look that I like, but some people are okay with it. But it's a lot of extra labor, and we want to make sure we capture it. So just to assist our sales team with making sure that they did that, I wrote ECS. And normally, one of our closet sections is typically going to have like a fixed shelf here. And so our shop's nomenclature for joining something together is spline. And so what I've done is whenever we require split, a biscuited panel, whenever we need to split these parts, really, which is the cabin division terminology, whenever we're trying to split one of these parts that's too long, um, I have it automatically happening, but I also have this little black line showing up, which is just that CAD, or really that black object I was just remarking on when talking about CAD dimensions. And so this line here, and I've got one so that our team can see it from the side as well. It's just again, it's just like a black object that I've dimmed, but it follows the dimensions of this fixed shelf, or really some number with some calculations that I've built into this. And so if you write your UCS to follow the math that I just wrote into the equation for this number, you'll get a line that follows exactly where you need it to be whenever your assembly moves up and down. So, that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 lines, right? You'd have to dim 6 different black lines, and only some of them would really need to be parametric with your assembly. Some of them could be static. And so what I did when I was working with this, let's just say that these are my lines that I've created with my UCS, was I always had one line that came up to about here. And then my next line would be parametrically built to go up to the top of my blocking. So, something like this. And as my assembly grows and shrinks in height, if I recall, I think I also built this block with a UCS as well, so that it would all kind of follow suit, because I really didn't like moving the blocking after a while. So anyway, all of these lines, which can absolutely be built with a UCS, would now follow my assembly up and down, if you will, much better than I can manually. But as all of this portion would move up or down, because I was able to build this line with a UCS, the bottom here stayed static always. It was always right here. So, it would be the equivalent of this. As it grows up and down, the UCS would keep the bottom of this line where it needs to be down here. And then along with that, you just have your little CAD note here that has the same equation built into it. And now you've built a section detail that parametrically shows exactly where your blocking is for all of your cabinets. And you can use the same trick for upper cabinets as well, without, having to draw the assembly beneath it and the whole wall all the way down. You basically just do the same exact trick, but instead of the top, well, the top would still move up or down, right? But let me just try to show a quick sample of what I'm talking about. So, this would be something like something like this. And oh, right, that's my dimension line they're showing. So, let's just say that your upper cabinet detail tends to look like this, right? And this is to indicate that you've got a wall, that you have a wall cabinet and it's this much distance above the floor. And then, let's just say that again, you draw your blocking in, and you would do this with a UCS, as I was speaking about earlier, so you're not wasting your time with the click-a-thon. So this blocking would always remain static. It would always stay here, but this one would move up and down. But you'd still have the same concept of having, basically some dimension lines with a break. Sorry, being a little bit sloppy and lazy on this, which I should not be. So again, envision that, you're, geez. You've got your CAD lines. Well, they're not CAD lines, right? They're just black objects that you've got a UCS that's dimming into um, this assembly. And this is completely static, but you'd have a variable here driven by an equation on a parameter that's for your lower blocking. And then because it's very easy to tell how far above the floor the assembly is, we just have to reference the right parameters. And you do the same thing for the upper here. And so what this really creates for you, again, is just an extraordinarily flexible way to actually drive in the closest way that I know of, to like drive dimensions and almost CAD dimension lines with a UCS to speed up your shop drawings and provide your section details with, much greater consistency. It's when you do it like that, when you really start to standardize everything that you're doing with your section details in this way, you can pump shop drawings out so fast. It's ridiculous. And so then again, in tandem with the little tricks I'm talking about for showing your blocking, um, you can do those same types of tricks to drive dimensions down here. Really, in some of these areas where you know that you've got a static location for your drawing here, your cabinet will always go up and to the left. And so it becomes very easy to actually put those same types of CAD notes in here. The toe recess note will always need to move front and back, but this this CAD note here for 18 and 3/4 that I've got, this one could be automated in the same way that I've shown this. You just have another set of CAD lines that come out with a little text note here with an equation to always call out the cabinet's depth minus the cabinet's toe recess, which is easy enough to get to. And now you've got one less thing that you have to work with. And the more time you spend on this, the more you'll start to realize that you can actually keep going with that further and further, to the point of if you really wanted to, you could do your toe kick details with that automatically, and you wouldn't even really have to move them forward or backwards. And then at that point, instead of controlling your note with a layer, you could actually drive it with attributes or cabinet notes. So that's just about all that I've really got for today. This is a much shorter stream than usual, but this is a part of the software that I really like quite a bit, and I think that I miss doing shop drawings sometimes, but I also think it's one of those things that is easy to think that you miss it until you have to do it all day every day because it can just be so redundant. But anyway, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I'd really like to kind of talk about this session. And I don't think that there really is. So thank you for watching.